Okay, last time we went looking for a soldier. In the letters and effects of soldiers, the website over here, and we also double checked to see if our soldier was found on Library and Archives Canada, which is over here. There's one other site we should check to see whether we can find our soldier, and that's on the Great Canadian War Project. The Great Canadian War Project isn't always super accurate, but when it's got information, it's almost always really interesting. So we go to the Great Canadian War Project, we look under searches, and then we try the general soldier search. This site doesn't have every Canadian who fought in World War I. But if we look at Bertram Cox, we find only one Bertram Cox listed here, our guy, Bertram Howard Cox. We click on his regimental number, and it will give us a summary of his information. So we've got his regimental number, the fact he was in the Army, that he was with the 59th Battery. Did he survive the war? Yes. Originally came from Barbados. It's the same guy as we know. Here's an interesting one, because when we looked at his military records, it said he was 6'2". Here it says he's 5'2". If there's a discrepancy, if there's something different between the Great Canadian War Project and their military record, believe the military record that you find at Library and Archives. So here it says 5'2", there it said 6'2", so we can assume he's probably 6'2". Now there's some interesting details here. Such as his age, but the size of his chest, 35 inches, is reasonably typical. But chest expansion here. Now, you're probably wondering, what is that? When you inhale, your chest expands. 4 inches is a really large chest expansion. So what that probably indicates is this guy was pretty solidly built. He was a pretty buff guy. Likely he was the kind of guy that a girl would have noticed if he was walking down the street. If you look for Bertram Howard Cox, like we did last time, on the Library and Archives site, and you click on his attestation paper, which should come up in a moment, one thing we'll see is that he was born in Barbados, but he lived at 72 Donald Street. And if we go to Google Maps here and we look up 72 Donald Street, you'll see here that it's south of Broadway, and that he lived just west of Donald. Now, this is actually a pretty ritzy neighborhood, and your clue that it's a ritzy neighborhood is the Delano Art Museum right over here, because the Delano Art Museum was the former home of Hugh MacDonald, and Hugh MacDonald was one of the early premiers of Manitoba. He was the son of our first Prime Minister, John A. Macdonald, but for Bertram Cox to have lived a short distance from where the former premier lived suggests that this was a fairly ritzy neighborhood, that a lot of nice people lived here, and that's an important clue when we're trying to figure out what Bertram Cox was like. Other things we can learn is his next of kin. His closest living relative here is Isabel Cox, and Isabel Cox lives at 72 Donald Street, which would give you a clue, if it didn't already say it, that Isabel is either Bertram's mother or his wife, and it says that's his mother. So for his closest living relative to be his mother, that tells us two things. His father's probably dead, and he's not married. So we also know his job was a bank clerk, your trader calling bank clerk. A bank clerk would be a decent job. It would pay fairly well. It would pay more than a laborer, but it's not a rich job. It's not a job where you're making millions of dollars. So he's doing well. He's living in a nice neighborhood. But part of the reason he lives in a nice neighborhood is because he lives with his mother. Now, if you want to find out a little bit more about him, we take a look at the back side of this document. So we just flip from page 1 to page 2, and then we click here. And it should come up. Okay, and we find out more about him here. We find out his age when he joined the Army. He was 21 years and 3 months. Here it says he was 6'2", so the other website probably they made a mistake. But they did accurately report his chest and the chest expansion. His complexion is ruddy, so he's got a red look to his complexion, maybe freckles, that kind of thing. His eyes are blue, his hair is brown, so he's got a fairly distinctive look. He's a tall, powerfully built guy with brown hair and blue eyes. So, as I say, he's probably a bit of a looker, somebody that people would notice. He is a churchgoer, listed with the Church of England. We'd call it the Anglican Church. And most people in that time period would be going to church. This isn't unusual, but it gives you a bit of a clue to his background. Now, if we go back to the previous screen, the motherlode of information is down here. Don't miss this link, because this is his full military service file. Every document the military has on him is in here and was scanned. It may take a while to load. It may take a while to start up here. Now, as I said, it's a big file. If you look at the top here, this is page 1 of 60. So there's a lot of stuff in here. This is a scan of the attestation record that we saw already. The back side over here. The other stuff in here. And there's a list here of everything that's in the file. If you look through his records here, you're going to find some interesting stuff. For example, this is a list of the times he was in the hospital. And although we can't make out all of these, I think this is PNO, which the closest I can find, if I do a Google search, is a PNO would be the principal nursing officer, which suggests that she would have been the one who probably released him. But interesting one up here, he's got bronchitis, and he's checked for bronchitis by 2 different individuals. The one up here, NYDA, is suggestive because if you look up NYDA, it appears to be a treatment for lice. So there's a good chance somewhere in the trenches he managed to get lice, which is kind of gross, but it was trench life. If you dig through those records, you can probably discover a lot more stuff. But the last place you want to look to is the Canadian Letters and Images Project. So a lot of the other stuff is details and facts, and you can interpret facts, but you might have more success bringing your individual to life if you look at the personal aspect here. So, for example, with Bertram Cox on the Canadian Letters and Images Project, there are 39 letters that he wrote home. Interestingly, there are almost no letters that the parents or family or girlfriend ever wrote to the soldier, because there was generally a shortage of paper at the war front, and the type of paper that was in the shortest supply was the type of paper that you might have trouble buying in the store right now. So you can guess what those letters probably got used for. But here, Bertram Cox has a lot of letters, and he's probably one of the better people. It's something to check when you pick a soldier. So we'll see if his letter will load. So this is his first letter. Somebody has done all the hard work for you. Instead of having to read his handwriting, you get to read a nicely typed up version of it. Admittedly, there's no paragraphs in here, but it will tell you the details. It'll tell you when he went to England. It will tell you where they camped, what his service was like. It gives you a whole lot of details here. So between these different sites, you can find out a lot about your soldier that you know is absolutely 100% factual, and the rest of it you can kind of imagine a little bit. There's a lot of scope for imagination here. Historians do have to draw conclusions from what they know. He lived on Donald Street. He wasn't married. Apparently didn't have a girlfriend. He volunteered because Canadian soldiers weren't being recruited at this point. And we can start to draw some conclusions. What was this guy doing to war? A big, tall, good-looking guy without a girlfriend who seemed to be successful, seemed to have money, seemed to have it all. Why did he go off to war? Our job here is to tell his story.